Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
9 minutes before 8. David, coming to you, the next caller in just a moment. Should we take probably the most catastrophic or serious allegation, and there was no shortage, was the fact that tens of thousands of people died needlessly. And acutely aware that I'm talking about people you know and love now. We know that the number of people that have died and with not necessarily from, with coronavirus in the United Kingdom is 127,000. If you look to France, okay, 108,000 people have died there. It's horrific. I appreciate we're talking about human lives here. But let's just temper what Mr. Cummings said. Britain has a far bigger transport hub with Heathrow Airport than France. Britain, sadly, is the second fattest nation in Europe. That dubious record goes to Germany. And we have an older population than France. Okay? So I'm not seeking for a moment to minimise the impact of the allegations, but to say tens of thousands of people died needlessly, I remind you, it's 127,000 here, it's 108,000, condolences to everybody in France. Does that allegation really hold up? Because if you look, and I say again, these are human lives. Britain has a far bigger transport hub than France. Britain, sadly, is the second fattest nation in Europe. The biggest one is Germany. And Britain has an older population. So, and it's a brutal way to do it. But does that one actually stack up? You'll be the judge of that. We'll come to more of your views on that in just a moment. Let's get a government response, though, to the allegations from yesterday. And I don't know what he's done wrong, because they've decided to put Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary Robert Jenrick out on parade today. This is the equivalent of being on the naughty step, I imagine, Secretary of State. Thank you for coming on. What is your view of Dominic Cummings this morning, sir? Morning.
Well, look, Mr. Cummings has made his statement. He's given his side of the story, if you like. I don't think that it's particularly helpful to get into allegations. I'm sure you'll want to question me. What we're focused on now is moving forward. We're still responding to the pandemic. We're still vaccinating people. We're still dealing with and learning about new variants. There will come a time in the public inquiry the Prime Minister has organised next year when these questions can rightly be heard in a calm and reflective manner with the evidence laid out. I think that's the right way to handle this, and it's better for the government to continue focusing on the response and the future right now.
I hear that, but do you support the notion that tens of thousands of people died who might not needed to?
Well, I think it was an extremely challenging situation for the whole country, and the government did everything that it could with the information that was available to it at the time. The Prime Minister acted at all times, I believe, in the best interests of the country as he saw it. Were there things we could have done differently or better? I'm sure that there were, but much of that is now with the benefit of hindsight, which of course is easy to say. There were some things at the beginning where we simply didn't know very much about the virus. As we learnt, we adapted and evolved our strategy and changed things as quickly as we possibly could.
I guess, Secretary of State, the key issue here is confidence, because God forbid we need to move into some form of lockdown or whatever it might be. The nation wants to have confidence in the Prime Minister and senior personnel such as yourself. And I think, given a rather rocky start, and we'll debate that another time, I think many of you and your colleagues have earned that. Sadly now, we hear of a riven number 10, we hear of a Prime Minister reportedly more obsessed with the dog chewing the furniture than possibly tackling COVID, and his almost unhinged fiancée. Why should my listeners have confidence in that team?
Well, that wasn't my experience. I saw a Prime Minister who was focused on tackling an unprecedented pandemic, who worked day and night, who was himself almost died as a result of the pandemic, and then came back to work.
But he was the
incredibly
mayor of
quickly.
Jaws, Mr.
Was
Jenrick.
working.
Mr. Jenrick, he was the mayor of Amityville or whatever it is. I want to keep the beaches open, we heard.
Well, the people that I worked with, both in number 10, if you like, but also within my department, were extremely capable people under huge pressure, but working hard and getting many things right. You know, in my own department, for example, we brought in almost all the people who were sleeping rough on the streets of the country within a matter of days. we delivered millions of food boxes to people who were clinically extremely vulnerable, standing up that service, I think, within 10 days of being asked to do so. So there were huge challenges which were overcome, where the government was very successful. The vaccine programme, of course, is the one which we've all seen in our daily lives, because that's been so enormously successful and globally recognised. But of course there were things which we could have done differently. But remember that we didn't always have the information that we have today to make those judgments. Care homes, for example, is one area where we all wish we'd been able to do more to protect the vulnerable people there.
That's an area
but of course,
where
at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know that the virus was as transmissible as it turned out to be amongst the asymptomatic.
But isn't that
as
an area
soon as
where
we learnt that conclusively, we changed the strategy and did more to protect people.
But care homes, that's an area where clearly the Health Secretary lied, isn't it, according to Dominic Cummings? He can't stay in post, can he, Mr Hancock? He lied about the policy concerning care homes.
The Health Secretary has already refuted those allegations, and he's going to come before Parliament later today.
You have full
to
confidence
answer them himself.
in your colleague, Mr Jenrick?
Well, I know Matt Hancock well. I've worked with him. He's worked unbelievably hard over the course of the last year, and he's going to come before Parliament today, I think on 2 occasions, to answer these questions himself, and I'm sure we'll be putting forward a robust defence of those allegations. And then I think he's doing a press conference later today, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for him to put forward his side of the story. But the Department for Health worked incredibly hard, as of course did the NHS, and many things like the vaccine programme are demonstrably very successful.
What has the Prime Minister had to say after Mr Cummings' testimony yesterday? Have you spoken with him, texted him, emailed, whatever it might be?
I haven't spoken with him, but I saw what he said at PMQs, which
that was sort of during, wasn't it, in fairness?
He said then that he was deeply sorry for the loss of life, that he wished he could have done even more to support the country through that time, but that at every turn he was acting in the best interest of the country as he saw it. And I thought that was a very fair statement, entirely reflects the Prime Minister that I know and saw in those early weeks and months of the pandemic.
Couple of last points. Your view of Mr Cummings, Mr Jenrick?
Well, I worked well with Dominic Cummings, as I hope I do with other colleagues within government. He tried his best in Number 10. As everybody did, he's now left. He put forward his views yesterday. I never think it's fruitful to get into tit-for-tat, debating this or that. But there will come a time next year in the public inquiry where all of us who've been involved in this will lay out events as clearly and honestly as we can.
Would you want to work with Mr Cummings again in a future government?
Well, I think Dominic himself said that he had no intention of returning to politics. But as I say, I worked well with him when he was in government. He had a lot to offer, but he's left government now. Okay. And those of us who remain are focused on the future and how we can build the country back after the pandemic.
The future here on LBC, bringing in your Communities Secretary brief, is in the next round, speaking with Dame Maureen Lipman. Now, just to remind you, Dame Maureen has had to leave Equity after more than 50 years because, as she perceives it, their rather pro-Palestinian stance and trying to get actors and actresses, if we use that word anymore, to go to demos. And she's spoken very strongly about that. Indeed, she wants her money back for her membership. She can give it to charities on both sides of the discontent. Just a word on Dame Maureen Lipman's stance and the possible problems with Equity, again as Community Secretary. Robert Jenrick.
Well, I think she has been extremely brave over a number of years on numerous occasions in standing up against anti-Semitism. We should have absolutely no tolerance of racism in this country, of any kind, including anti-Semitism. And Maureen Lipman, I'm afraid, has been the victim of that. And she is brave and courageous for standing up against it. I don't know the specifics of the situation with her union, but if they are perpetrating those views or giving license to them, that's absolutely wrong, and she's right to fight it. And
final question, as Community Secretary, the teacher involved at Batley Grammar School was effectively suspended for 2 months while an investigation was taking place because he used certain material during a religious education class. He is going back to work. What would you urge everybody in and around that school to do now, Mr Jenrick?
Well, look, I thought it was very wrong that you saw protests outside that school after the teacher in question did that class. We should never have protests outside the gates of our schools, intimidating students or teachers. Of course, teachers have a responsibility to act appropriately, to teach with caution, with care, our children. But we also believe in free speech in this country. We believe that teachers have a right to have provocative materials, to do religious education appropriately. And I'm pleased that it seems like that situation has been resolved, that he's returning to work. And I would urge people to be as careful as possible not to return to those scenes of having protests outside the school gates, which were completely unacceptable.
Grateful for your time today. Thank you, Robert Jenrick, Housing Secretary, appearing here, Housing and Community Secretary, appearing here on LBC, where the time is 2 minutes after 8. News is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Matt Hancock is due to address Dominic Cummings' claims that he performed disastrously in his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. The Health Secretary's office has denied suggestions Mr Hancock lied to colleagues and hugely disrupted efforts to set up a testing system. The former number 10 aide made the allegations in a marathon evidence session to MPs yesterday. Former Cabinet Minister Sir David Lidington says it underlines the need to push forward with a full inquiry.
We've heard